Welcome back, Sebastian here. So today I want to really ask you a simple question. Was Guenther Steiner an effective team principal for the Haas F1 team? So of course, January 10th, about a week ago, Guenther Steiner, it was announced that he was be leaving the Haas F1 team, and he was of course replaced by Anyao Komatsu, who is a longtime trackside engineer for the team. So today I just kind of want to look through Steiner's run as team principal of the Haas team, which effectively is 10 years. So April 14th, 2014, he was announced as the Haas team principal. This was, of course, basically 2 years before they would actually hit the track in F1 in 2016. And he had basically started building a relationship with Gene Haas almost 4 years prior to this. Basically when they were trying to get the USGP team off the ground back when they had all the new expansion teams basically that came in 2010. But that kind of built from there, and it grew from there, and basically they decided to bring in their own team, Haas F1, and Steiner was really the guy who developed the ties with Ferrari, developed the ties with Dallara to kind of help this teamwork, help this model of building an F1 team work. So of course for Haas, they have three headquarters, right? Kannapolis, North Carolina in the United States, that's kind of where their main operations are, but they also have a UK headquarters in Banbury in the UK. Of course, their chassis, a very important part of the car, is made by Dallara, which is in Verano del Meligari, which is in Italy. And of course, they do have a small kind of workshop slash factory kind of attached to Ferrari's main base, which is in Maranello, Italy. So team very, very spread out. A lot of parts that are outsourced to different groups, including Dallara and to Ferrari. And this relationship with Ferrari has always been a talking point with Haas. They basically take as many of the transferable components as they possibly can. So that includes suspension, gearbox, and rear crash structure. And those are all decisions that Guenther Steiner had a massive say in, and it was kind of one of the basically how they were able to get a team in F1 that was still competitive, but at a much lower cost. And so let's take a look at the results in F1 through their time in the series. So 2016, their first year, 29 points, 8th in the constructors, much better than I think anyone was really expecting, and it really showed that this model could actually work. The third column I've included is their gap to Ferrari, which I think is important because, of course, many of their components are based on Ferraris. So gap to Ferrari that first year, 1.607 seconds. So pretty close there. 2017, first year of the new regulations after the very, very big overhaul in the aerodynamic regulations between 2016 and 2017. 47 points, 8th in the constructors. Gap to Ferrari, 2.105 seconds, a little bit bigger, but that's understandable given that they didn't really have any Ferrari parts to base that year's car on. However, 2018 is their best year in the series by quite a margin. 93 points, 5th in the constructors. Gap to Ferrari, 1.65 seconds. So honestly, bigger gap to Ferrari than 2016, but much better position-wise in the Constructors' Championship. Of course, it's important to note that they would have finished 6th that year if Force India's points hadn't been basically reset to 0 after Lawrence Stroll bought the team. 2019, this is where kind of the honeymoon period, this is where it ends, this is kind of where things start to go downhill. 28 points, 9th in the constructors, gap to Ferrari 1.61 seconds, actually slightly better than 2018, but these gaps are all qualifying gaps, and this is where for Haas's big weakness really shows up, one that arguably they still haven't fixed yet, and that is issues with their rear suspension and understanding how it affects the Pirelli tires and how how to keep the tire life in the right window. 2020, of course, first year with COVID, 3 points, 9th in the constructors, gap to Ferrari 1.155 seconds, one of the smallest on the board, but of course Ferrari had an absolutely disastrous season, finishing 6th themselves. Of course, with that really detuned power unit that they were basically forced to rebuild from scratch very, very late. So only 3 points, 9th in the constructors that year. 2021, the team's in very dire financial straits, and they basically say, we're not going to develop this year's car. We're basically going to take the 2020 car with the floor cutouts that are required by the regulations, and we're going to save as much money as possible. They get no points, 10th in the constructors, and a gap to Ferrari 1.942 seconds. So first year within a fairly stable set of regulations where the gap between themselves and Ferrari has actually increased. 2022, this was the year that they had been hyping up, saying that we were building for this year. We've just devoted all of our resources from a very, very early time point for this season. At the start of the season it was honestly pretty good, but as the season went along, things definitely tailed off. 37 points total, 8th in the constructors, gap to Ferrari 1.745 seconds, which is not bad considering its first year of the regulations. First year 2017 regulations 2.1, 1.745, honestly not too bad. This year 2023, stable regulations, 12 points, 10th in the constructors, definitely obviously they were not to be too happy about. Gap to Ferrari 0.956 seconds in qualifying. So the first time that they're under 1 second, but still they were one of the slowest teams in qualifying. And this is, I think, one of the really key talking points. The gap to Ferrari has always been about a second and a half, in the bad years, 2017, 2021, close to 2 seconds. But it's never really been close. There's always been a gap between Ferrari and themselves. And as these regulations mature, as we get closer, as we all get closer to the optimals, all the teams get closer to the optimal solution. What's going to happen to Haas? Is this gap this gap between themselves and Ferrari going to keep closing down? In theory, it should. But at the same time, when they're using so many parts from Ferrari, and they also use so many parts from the year before from Ferrari, with the addition of the cost cap. Are they just going to be hung out to dry because they're going to always have this big gap between themselves and Ferrari? That's something that's, I think something that's very fair to ask. And the rumor is that one of the key points of friction between themselves, between Gene Haas and Guenther Steiner, was that Steiner wanted to be more independent, and Gene Haas wanted to follow the Red Bull model. Kind of try to develop a car that was similar to the Red Bull. So, obviously that ended up with Steiner not in the team anymore. Now, drivers, another area where the team principal does have, quite a say in who drives for the team. So, very first season, they started out with Romain Grosjean and Esteban Gutierrez. Romain Grosjean, at that time, was a pretty solid driver, had some pretty good, strong years for Lotus, 2014, 2015, plus 2013 as well, I would guess. And Gutierrez, he had a couple years of experience in F1 in 2013, 2014. Wasn't a particularly good driver, but at least he was one with F1 experience. So makes sense to go with that kind of lineup. Gutierrez dropped after one season of no points, pretty disappointing season, and he was replaced by Kevin Magnussen. So I think definitely an upgrade there. And of course, Grosjean and Magnussen was the lineup that they would have all the way until 2020. So let's see, 17, 18, 19, 20, 4 years of a very stable driver lineup. You can make a good argument though that Grosjean was a bit past his best before point. Those last couple of seasons, you can argue he should have been dropped after 2018, especially after the first half of the season, where he had so many mistakes and crashes, and it seemed like he had something happening almost every race, at least in the first half of the season. Then, of course, they drop Grosjean. Well, Grosjean basically crashes in the big ball of fire. Horrific accident, obviously, at the time. Last 2 races of the season, he was replaced by Pietro Fittipaldi, basically on an interim basis. And then, of course, this is COVID, the first COVID season, and Haas was really struggling for money. And they replaced their both drivers, Grosjean and Magnussen, with Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin. The rumor was that they wanted to have a lineup of Magnussen and Schumacher, but they needed Mazepin's money. So unfortunately, they dropped Mazepin and replaced him replaced Magnussen, replaced him with Mazepin. And this is something that the team's principal doesn't really have a whole lot of say over. He's not really the one who cuts the checks and pays the bills, but he kind of has to do what Gene Haas says when it comes to things like that. Of course, then we had Mazepin was of course let go in February 2022 when the Russian invasion happened. Magnussen was brought back and he's been there ever since. Schumacher was let go for Nico Hulkenberg 2023, and I remember there was a lot of controversy about that, about whether it was the right decision, how it was a strange decision. I can understand why, given that Hulkenberg was a much older driver and Schumacher was seen as having more potential. But I do think based on 2023, it seemed like it was a pretty good move. Hulkenberg's qualifying pace was definitely based on the teammate head-to-heads between Magnussen and Schumacher and Hulkenberg Schumacher. Definitely seemed like an upgrade there. Race pace, I think pretty close. But given how poor Haas was in the races, it's not really. I don't think that would have made much of a difference. And of course, Magnussen and Hulkenberg will be the two drivers in 2024. So, on the topic of drivers, I honestly don't think that they did too bad themselves. Of course, the only ones I think you would say are head scratchers, objectively speaking, would be replacing Magnussen with Mazepin, and then arguably Schumacher for Hulkenberg. But they were never a team that had great results. Fifth place finish being their best result, and then besides that, a lot of 9th and 10th place finishes. So you're never going to have be able to get the best drivers because no one's going to really be wanting to drive for you. One, I think, criticism that's quite fair of Haas, and I think you can kind of argue that this is Guenther Steiner, criticism of Guenther Steiner, was that his reluctance to take rookies. Supposedly there was the option for Charles Leclerc to drive for the team in 2018, but he basically didn't want to have any rookies in the team. Just because of the extra costs involved from them crashing so much. But you can imagine Charles Leclerc in that 2018 Haas would have been quite something to watch. And, I think that's something that is kind of a shortcoming of that approach of never taking a rookie. Of course, you might have your duds from time to time like Mazepin, or they might crash a lot like Schumacher. But by kind of just outright saying we'll never take a rookie, it means that you can never really pick up your own driver and perhaps develop them into something special. Haas could have potentially had Zhou Longyu when he was coming out of F2. I think he would have been a pretty handy driver to have long term, especially given that he does bring some money with him. I think another thing as well, apparently Haas doesn't have an in-house simulator, which is one of the reasons why Mazepin basically had such a poor rookie season, was that he never really had a simulator. He was learning the tracks on the F1 game of all things, which is something that an professional F1 team should not be dealing with. So, I think there is some fair criticism there. Now, last point I want to talk about is Netflix. Of course, Guenther Steiner became very, very popular through Netflix, through because of much of the colorful language that he used on the show, and plus his very blunt and frank attitudes when talking to people. And I think you can make argument over why that would be a good leadership style, but you can also make I think there's some very fair criticisms of some of the things that he said in public about his team personnel or about his drivers. Of course, when the camera's on you, you don't know if they're acting differently than they would in private. But of course, it's one of those things that from the outside it's very, very hard to judge. I think for me personally, I do think that Steiner did a pretty good job as team principal. I think he was instrumental in helping to build the relationships with Ferrari, with Dallara. I think that kind of helped get the team off the ground. Of course, he had been in F1 before with Jaguar, and I think very, very early on with Red Bull. And I think his role in kind of building the team, and apparently he interviewed every team member when they were first building the team in 2015, 2014 as well. So massively influential in kind of helping to build this team. And the fact that it's lasted as long as it has is something that's definitely they should be proud of, given that not every new team is able to really last that long in F1. And of course, on the topic of money, it's not something that he really has a ton of control over. It's really decided by Gene Haas. And of course, if Gene Haas says you need to go get a pay driver, or if you have this much budget, there's only so much that Steiner can do. So I do think on the whole, I think he did his job very well. I can understand why it might be time to move on, but I think most people will look upon his time in F1, or at least his time with Haas, pretty favorably. So that's all for this video, talking about Steiner and Haas, whether or not I think he was an effective team principal for the team. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.